And of course, Donald Trump today at NATO saying very much what he thinks. He'll be here very, very soon in this country. And we'll talk a bit about that tonight. But I have to say, last night, the callers that I got onto this show, I have never heard so many people that angry about anything in British politics as what many of them see as a betrayal of the Brexit referendum and indeed of Mrs May's manifesto by that Chequers agreement that was reached last Friday. Lots of very strong adjectives being used, but it's not just here at LBC we're getting this, because today the Daily Telegraph find themselves right in the middle of the great Brexit debate. An article that appeared in their newspaper this morning, written by Christopher Howes, who is their letters editor, explained that the paper has received a storm of letters from angry readers who feel Mrs May has betrayed them. But he goes further than that. He goes further than that by saying, he writes a headline, "Is Theresa May guilty of treason? Plenty of our readers think so. Politicians would be wise to listen up." Now, the Telegraph does not endorse the use of the word treason, but the Telegraph understands why people have such strong emotions over the Chequers agreement. Now, unsurprisingly, they're coming under considerable attack for even writing the article. They're coming under attack for even reporting how Middle England is feeling about the Chequers deal. Lord Adonis, he, one of the key Remainers-in-Chief, says this is disgraceful and the Telegraph should delete it immediately. And many other commentators, you are guilty of gross hyperbole. But many commentators on the left, many pro-EU commentators condemning the Telegraph from even writing it, but others noticing this trend. Quentin Letts, writing in the rival Daily Mail, says Tory supporters are not naturally troublesome people. They tend to express themselves politely, but timidity, duplicity, vacillation, total surrender, appalling, appeaser. These are just some of the words Telegraph letter writers have flung at the vicar's daughter, Mrs May. Now, you will have noticed, of course, if you're a regular listener to this show, that I've been calling her Theresa the Appeaser for over a year. And a lot of people were very unhappy that I was daring to do that. But it seemed to me pretty obvious that she never actually believed in Brexit. She was going to make some huge concessions. But I must confess, even I was surprised at the extent of the sheer duplicity that was displayed on Friday. I mean, to come up with a deal, keeping us inside the customs union, making our laws identical to that of Brussels, going totally against what our own manifesto had said, what the Brexit vote had said, and then looking into the cameras and saying, we're going to take back control of our laws, our borders and our money. I mean, I found the whole thing quite extraordinary. So, I want to know from you, do you feel Mrs May is guilty of treason? And if you think that's a description too far, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, strong word or not, actually, she has betrayed us. You can text me to 84850. Or maybe you have another word that you think is more appropriate to sum up the Chequers Accord, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook Live and comment there too. Treason. Well, the Oxford English Dictionary definition of treason is, it is the crime of betraying one's country, especially by attempting to kill or overthrow the sovereign or the government. And we think of the word treason, perhaps we think of Lord Haw-Haw, making those broadcasts during the war, telling us that Nazi Germany was a great country, it was time we should surrender. When the war ended, he was taken to the Tower of London, put up against a wall, and shot. I mean, that is how we've, treated traitors, people guilty of treason in the past. And that, I guess, is why this word is so contentious. But people are using it in the context that they feel betrayed by the Prime Minister. So is she guilty of treason? Let's get to Ian, a caller from Beaconsfield. Good evening, Ian.
Nigel, hello again.
Hello there.
I don't think treason is totally accurate, but I totally understand why people are using it. I mean, it tends to refer to betrayal of the nation state and sovereign. But, ultimately, she is betraying the people.
Yes.
But there is also another aspect to the definition, which means, colluding with the enemy. And that is exactly what she is doing and has done. And I would use the term subterfuge to describe what she has done over the past 2 years, essentially, and delivered.
Ian, can you just tell me something? Who are the enemy?
Well, the enemy are essentially the European and British establishment, who are in effect one thing. And they are not the ally of the British people. They are not the British people. They are something completely different. And they are trying to install what can only be described as a pan-European authoritarian superstate. So, we could go further down that line. But, my point is that she is betraying us, and she set out to betray us. And that is the crux of the anger amongst the people, really, is that, it's not... they hide behind the illusion of incompetence, etc. But this is not incompetence.
Has she lied to us, Ian?
She has. She's been lying since day one. When she stood up and quivered, as I describe it, Brexit means Brexit. She meant nothing of the sort. She means Brexit means I'm going to try and think of a way out of this. And she was naive and stupid enough to believe that we were just going to give up and go, oh, don't worry, But, never underestimate the British people.
Ian,
we are clever and we are strong. And I said on Nick Ferrari's show the other day, if I were 20 years younger, I would say # we are not stupid. This is not going away.
I get that. Now, Ian, you live in Beaconsfield, and if you had to show somebody foreign what the idyllic English countryside looked like, with lovely ancient architecture, kind of Beaconsfield and its surrounds would be quite near the top of the list. You're living in one of the leafiest, prettiest, wealthiest, most comfortable parts of the United Kingdom. What sort of anger do you sense amongst your friends and family in Beaconsfield?
Well, it's mixed, but on the whole, people are just absolutely dismayed that, not the fact that it hasn't happened, but the fact that she has lied so blatantly and ridiculously. And I choose that word very deliberately, ridiculously, because, the assumption that we are stupid and we're just going to give up is ridiculous.
Well, I tell you what, Ian, I tell you something. Last July, I wrote "The Great Brexit Betrayal Has Begun." I did it on the Telegraph Online, and I said then that they must not underestimate what the backlash in this country will be if they betray the Brexit vote, and I think we're seeing a specimen of it. Ian, I thank you. Let's go to Mike, who's calling from Leatherhead in Surrey. Mike, good evening.
Good evening. I'm going to say something which is rather similar to your last caller in a slightly different way.
Okay.
But you've noticed very bizarre behaviour from Theresa May, yeah? Sort of locking everybody in checkers, taking away their mobile phones.
Extraordinary.
Threatening them with walking home.
Donald Trump calls her the schoolmistress. I reckon he's got it about right, hasn't he?
I would think to a degree, yes. And remember, she worked at the Home Office for 6 years. Now, you couldn't have survived so long if you were not a robot. She was probably, I think, responsible or connected with that thing they did with the Windrush generation. Remember
I do.
They had the landing passes and they destroyed them, and then they claimed, oh, you can't prove that you've lived here for 50 years. Now, this is the absurd ravings of a lunatic bureaucracy, and that is our civil service, our tax system, our legal system.
The establishment, Mike.
Yes, and they are under enormous threat. That's why they've come out and they've got Theresa by the throat and they've forced her to kind of make a decision. Because if they lose Europe, that's their cover blown.
But Mike, a proper leader would say to the civil service, you are paid for on the public purse, and it is your duty to follow what the elected government of this country tells you to do. Why doesn't she do that?
Because we don't have a democracy, and for the last 50 years we've actually been run secretly by the civil service, and they've pretended that it's capitalism or they're given the impression that we have democracy, but actually we don't. And now, unfortunately for them, the headlights are on them. They can't anymore hide behind the EU because they are masters of deception. And the people are deceived as well. But now the people are understanding. And I think I agree with you. She cannot maintain her position.
No, she's got to go. She's absolutely got to go. The worst Prime Minister I've seen in my lifetime. Mike, I thank you for your call. Messages flooding in here. No, I get on Twitter. She's not guilty of treason, but colluding with a foreign power to undermine democracy in your own country probably is. Well, you must choose yourselves whether you think treason is the right word. Paul from Solihull has very much made his mind up on SMS. To be honest, Nigel, I've been comparing Theresa May and others to Lord Haw Haw for some time, so Paul is pretty much a hardliner on this one. Jack is a new caller to the show from Evesham in Worcestershire. Middle England, Jack. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. So, what is the word to describe Theresa May? Are people going over the top, calling her a traitor?
They are. For treachery, I think you'd have to prove collusion between May and the EU, and I think that would be hard to do. I think I'm not so sure. I'm not a Trump fan, but I do appreciate some of what he's done.
Yep.
And I was a member of UKIP to add my name to the number to get to the Leave referendum. It was the first time in my life that I voted.
What, the referendum?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine that I'm...
So how do you feel now, Jack? Your first ever vote, and here we are with Theresa May wanting to keep us bound in the customs union and Brexit in name only. How do you feel?
Well, first I want to say thanks to you for... getting the referendum.
Well, that's sweet of you.
I'm grateful that I got to be a part of getting to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I'm angry.
Yeah.
I don't like saying that because I'm from my generation is quite left-leaning, so to speak, and I'm a centrist. But by their standards, I'm far right.
Of
my
course.
best mates, one of my best mates is a guy called Shohab.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets to the point where, anyway, back on track. Theresa May, I don't think she's colluding. She mucked up the general election, maybe somewhat purposefully to sort of weaken her majority, trying to hamstring herself so she had an excuse for why she couldn't get the Brexit done properly.
That's a bit conspiratorial, Jack.
The whole dementia thing, the bringing back fox hunting, things that people might agree or disagree with, but were unpopular overall and made her unpalatable to swing votes. And I think that scuppered her.
Jack, tell me something. Mm-hmm. What is the one word that you would use to describe her and her behaviour?
Cowardly.
Cowardly. All right, Jack, thank you. Now, do you know, in times gone past, if on shows like this on LBC, we've been calling a Prime Minister cowardly, we say, gosh, that's all a bit strong. Some pretty rich stuff coming out of LBC today. But the Telegraph say that their readers are calling her a traitor. Well, let me give you one little bit of good news. England are 1-0 up against Croatia after 15 minutes. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:16. Is Mrs. May guilty of treason? Gosh, it's a strong word, but the Daily Telegraph are getting lots and lots of their readers writing in and saying that. They feel that she has betrayed the nation, and that is akin to treason. Not many of you ringing up and being complimentary about her. If you want to, we believe in free speech. 0345 6060 973. Come on and tell me why she's such a fantastic Prime Minister. Now, Donald Trump is in Brussels. He's been at NATO. Here he was speaking earlier today.
It's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. And I think we have to talk to Germany about it. On top of that, Germany is just paying a little bit over 1%. Whereas the United States, in actual numbers, is paying 4.2% of a much larger GDP. So I think that's inappropriate also. You know, we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting everybody, and yet we're paying a lot of money to protect. Now, this has been going on for decades. This has been brought up by other presidents, but other presidents never did anything about it because I don't think they understood it or they just didn't want to get involved.
Well, there's Trump saying it as it is. And, of course, the former German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, left office and went straight to work for, yes, you've guessed it, a Russian gas company. 60% of Germany's energy comes from Russian gas, in contrast to France, where 60% of their energy comes from their own nuclear stations. So Trump pointing out, as he sees it, German hypocrisy. But the bigger, broader point about people not paying their way in NATO. On that, I believe he is absolutely right. He tweeted after that speech, "What good is NATO if Germany is paying Russia billions of dollars for gas and energy? Why are there only 5 out of 29 countries that have met their commitment? The US is paying for Europe's protection, then loses billions on trade. Must pay 2% of GDP immediately, not by 2025. So they've all agreed by 2025 they'll reach the 2%, club membership fee. Trump is saying it needs to happen now. And actually, do you know what? An awful lot of European countries, frankly, are freeloading off the Americans. My disappointment is that this was the opportunity today for Theresa May to prove she's a proper stateswoman. She could have stood up and said, we are going to more than meet our commitment of 2%, and she could have acted as the broker. She could have acted as the bridge between the Americans and between the rest of Europe. She chose to pretty much say nothing. But that's probably because she isn't really any good. But others think she's even worse than not good. Others think she is a traitor. Mr. Farage, the truth is she is a betrayer. She thinks she is pleasing everyone. But we voted and we won. And she just doesn't want to address it. I am angry and fed up with her. Kathy's just angry. Others are angrier than that. Steve is a brand new caller to this show, and he calls from Twickenham. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening. So, no, I don't believe that she's guilty of treason at all. I do believe that she's guilty of incompetence, but I think that's where you and I part company.
Right.
Because what solution would you proffer for the fact that our manufacturing industries, particularly automotive and aerospace, rely for their components? 60% of their components come from the EU. They run just-in-time manufacturing processes. How would you deal with that?
Well, aerospace, of course, is a tariff-free, one of the very few
tariff-free
parts.
No, I'm not talking about tariffs. No, it's nothing to do with tariffs. That's always a straw man that you pull out. It's nothing to do with tariffs because they would only be 3%. Steve, just-in-time process.
There are two debates here, right? One is the debate that you're making, which is the argument of the CBI. It's the argument of many of the big businesses. Whether that argument is right or wrong isn't really the point. The point here, and we can debate that another time, and we will, but isn't the point here, Steve, that the British people were promised in a referendum, if you vote to leave, Cameron told us, if you vote to leave, we are leaving the single market, we are leaving the customs union, we're leaving the European Union, and it was perfectly clear what we voted on. Then, that was compounded by Theresa May fighting a Brexit means Brexit manifesto. And people have been promised this now twice, and they're not getting it. And that, Steve, I think is why people feel betrayed by the Prime Minister.
I think you're being completely disingenuous. Because
Go on.
The majority of people did not know, and still do not know, what the importance of the single market and the customs union is. In fact, it had to be explained by Sir Ian Rogers. It had to be explained to the British Cabinet.
Steve, you think we're going to be worse off after Brexit, don't you?
I think we're going to be a lot worse off
Okay,
after Brexit.
but
I think hundreds of thousands of jobs are at risk.
But we voted for independence. We voted for freedom. We voted to be a sovereign country. That is what the referendum, for good or bad, that is the decision the British people made. They made it in a referendum. They reinforced it in a general election. Don't they deserve to get it, whatever you think the economic consequences may be? I take a different view, but whatever you think they are.
No, and are you going to apologise to the hundreds of thousands of people who will lose their jobs because they're now manufacturing, and we need to keep.
Do you know, Steve? I did debate after debate on radio and television back from 1999 through the period of 2001-2, where I met people like you, I met big business bosses, I met big city banks, all of whom said, Mr. Farage talks about keeping the pound and running our own country. It's a romantic out-of-touch idea. Unless we join the euro, millions of jobs could be lost. Well, they were wrong then, Steve, and I believe they're wrong now. But there's a difference, Steve, between you and I having a different point of view and a healthy debate, as we're having, and a decision that has been promised by a Prime Minister not being given to them. All right? You call her incompetent. She's certainly that too. I'll agree with you on that point. Ian is calling from Yateley. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Nigel. You all right?
I'm all right. So a lot of people are using much stronger language than me, Ian. I haven't called her a traitor, but I have said she's betrayed the trust of the nation. Do you think the use of this word treason is appropriate?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
And no, when it filters down through the press and then through to the grassroots, they're going to use that to fuel it. I think we're at a very, very, very dangerous point in our politics. I think it's very historical. I think when David Cameron gave the warning for World War III, he wasn't too far off the mark. I know you call that fake news, but if you look at what's happening this weekend, for example, you've got the political tension. You've got the passions running high with both the RAF centenary and also the English football. Whether they lose or whether they win, they're still going to be high. You've got a summer heat wave, which is traditionally when riots are spilled out onto the streets. You've got counter demonstrations against Trump. And it's going to be an absolute flashpoint, and we need to be so careful with the language that we're using or promoting.
But Ian, here's the interesting point. Here's the interesting point, right? The interesting point is the people that are using very strong language are middle class, Middle England, Daily Telegraph readers. Something must have gone very badly wrong, Ian, I would suggest, in the trust between people and their rulers for this to have happened.
Clearly something's gone very wrong. I think if you look at the bigger picture, it's to do with the weaponization of information coming from Russia, from Putin. And I think it's been, I wouldn't use the word collusion, I think that's a bit strong, but I think parties who have all had aligned interests. So Putin's objective overall is to destabilise Europe, destroy NATO, destroy the EU, create chaos, and then roll west.
Well, I think Mr. Juncker's destroying NATO by telling people that they only need to pay 1% and they can join a European army. So I think he's having more effect there. But if there is collusion, Ian, and there's no evidence of any significant input from Putin or Russia in the British referendum or indeed the American election. There's none. There's a whole raft of conspiracy theorists out there, but there's none. But is there collusion between Theresa May's government and Mr. Barnier's European Commission to try and soften down Brexit to a level where it's unrecognisable?
No, I don't think so. I think it's part and parcel of being next door to Europe. We've been next door to Europe.
So would you overturn the referendum result?
Say again, sorry?
Would you overturn the referendum result?
Oh, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
Fine. No, that's fine. So you're probably, Lord Malloch Brown, who is Soros's big man here in the United Kingdom, Lord Malloch Brown, one of the biggest, strongest Remainers in Britain, praised the Prime Minister for her Chequers deal. Do you praise her too?
Oh, absolutely, of course I do. She's a hero. She's got everyone attacking her, including you, and I think it's highly irresponsible. I think you personally are going to take a lot of responsibility for the potential ensuing flashpoint, which will happen over the weekend. And it, Nigel.
No, I don't know it, Ian. There isn't going to be a flashpoint, but there is a lot of anger out there. I will agree with you on that. There is a big division that is opening up in this country, and it's very powerful stuff. Edward says, Jacob Rees-Mogg, your time has come. Think of Britain. Scotty thinks that Brexit itself is treason. Oh, Scotty, please, honestly. Let's go to Jill, a new caller from Bolton in Greater Manchester. Jill, good evening.
Good evening.
So, Mrs. May, what word would you use for her, Jill?
Well, I'm not sure about traitor. I think that might be too strong. But I've got to say, it's not just Theresa May. I've been expecting this. I think she's planned this from the beginning. Okay?
Yeah.
What really makes me furious is the Brexiteer turncoats. They should have all resigned after that Chequers, along with Boris Johnson and Steve Baker and whatnot.
Yep, David Davis. Yep.
Those people that are really annoying me, they do not have the courage of their convictions. They put the career before country.
Jill, do you know what? Jill? We're out of time, but you've just said that beautifully and succinctly. And by the way, I agree with you 100%. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:31 and time for the news with Thomas Watts. Mrs. May's Chequers Accord has got Middle England really, really irate and angry, and they're writing into the Daily Telegraph saying she's guilty of treason. I'm asking you whether she is. Most of you that have called so far have said that you've used other words. really very, very negative words, you haven't really gone quite as far as saying that it's treasonable. And very interesting, isn't it, that you get a call from somebody who voted Remain and thinks we should remain, to whom Theresa May is now a hero. I do not believe, if she stays as Prime Minister, that Brexit will happen properly, or that the Conservative Party will survive as a party. It seems to me to be pretty impossible. Now, this government, as you know, are in trouble. And you've seen this public anger. But Parliament next week is going to be the focus, because there is going to be a debate and a vote on this Chequers Accord. Earlier on this evening, I spoke to LBC's political editor, Theo Asherwood, and I asked him how the Tory backbenchers are feeling about this.
Very, very nervous, because they have been listening to their constituents, they've been taking soundings, and they are worried that this so-called Chequers Accord is going down very badly with the grassroots. And they want to make sure, Nigel, that the bottom does not fall out of Theresa May's vote. Tories currently polling at around 42%, and they're worried that because this has gone down so badly with their grassroots, you have to remember 70% of Conservative voters would rather we leave with no deal than a bad deal. That if this continues, and if the trend is that the Tories continue to do badly in the polls, as we've seen early indications show, then will they be ready to act?
So what is the next stage of this process?
Tomorrow we're going to have the white paper, and that's going to be published early morning. Well, certainly before lunchtime, we'll get the full details, and then we'll get the reaction. And that is going to set out the course of action the government wants to take in the negotiations over the summer for the terms on which Britain leaves. It's in effect going to formalise what happened at Chequers last week. Now, of course, that's going to be up for negotiation over the summer. MPs go on holiday, but the officials start to work between, those are officials both here in London and in Brussels. And the fear from Conservative MPs is that the British contingent are going to get beaten down at every turn. One area they could lose, of course, is we've said we want to remain in a customs area for goods. But in actual fact, will that, when push comes to shove, will that also include services? And that's the line that Emily Thornberry went on at Prime Minister's Questions today. So that when they come back after the summer recess, we end up with a deal that looks actually, from Britain's point of view, much worse than what Prime Minister presented after the Chequers plan, as the Chequers plan. And then there's a second piece of legislation. On Tuesday, the government has got to put the remaining stages of the trade bill through the House of Commons. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, along with Priti Patel, Marcus Fish, Bernard Jenkin, have tabled an amendment which would in effect bring an end to the Chequers proposal. And what that amendment does, they've put 4 amendments, but the key one would prevent Britain from collecting tariffs on behalf of the European Union, and it would prevent the European Union from collecting tariffs on behalf of Britain. Now,
which is the deal that Theresa May got the Cabinet to agree to at Chequers on Friday. So let's suppose that this amendment, the government can't win on an area like this, the Chequers agreement doesn't have the support of Parliament, what next?
All over to Labour. So if Labour, there's we think, around 50 to 60 Conservative rebels who would support this amendment. And there may be more after another weekend of looking at what's happening in the polls, MPs speaking to their constituents. That number is only, the thinking is it will only go up. Now, what does Labour do? Because, of course, we're hearing the discord in the shires. We've seen what's happening in the letters pages of the Daily Telegraph. But what happens when people start getting angry in Barnsley, in Burnley, in Blackburn, in Labour heartlands in the north of England, in the Midlands? Jeremy Corbyn understands this. His team understand this. They were very successful at wooing back traditional Labour voters from UKIP in particular during the last election. So they understand the danger here. And so would they be tempted to vote with those Brexiteers, because it also has the added bonus of potentially bringing down the government, but not being seen to prevent or frustrate Brexit. And that's what Jeremy Corbyn's team have to marry up. If they're going to bring down the government, they have to do it without being seen to frustrate or prevent Brexit. And this presents them with a perfect opportunity. But of course, there are moderates within the party who may well rebel against Jeremy Corbyn. And I understand that's exactly the calculation that's being made right at this moment.
Well, Theo Asherwood laying it out there. Next Tuesday, big debate, big vote in the House of Commons. If Labour decide to throw themselves on the same way as Jacob Rees-Mogg and the government lose, I just don't see how she can survive. I mean, I don't think she could have survived anyway, personally, but I could, of course, be wrong. But is she actually a traitor? And I get on Twitter, she is as guilty as Major and Brown of selling us down the river. I love your radio show, listening from Boston, Massachusetts. That's very kind of you, Vivian, thank you. This one's very clear. We voted for independence, control of our own affairs, for better or worse. I know the public mood. I was on the streets campaigning. And someone here, Bones on Twitter, says, Nigel, you want NATO to fail and you don't want an EU defence group. Just come out and say it. You want Putin to rule over you. Oh, please grow up. I want NATO to be strong and I want us to be a major player in it. I want us to be the bridge between America and Europe. And I do believe that Donald Trump's current criticisms of NATO are absolutely right. And I wish our Prime Minister had stood up and said that today. I really, genuinely do. Donna is my next caller from Sherborne in Dorset, and she's a new caller to this show. Welcome, Donna.
Hello, good evening. I think she's guilty of treachery.
You do?
Yeah, I certainly do. Her position in this country is not president, she's Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
She is within the cabinet, she's classed as first among equals. The cabinet are not inferior to her. She's their leader. Now, she colluded with the civil servants secretly behind the rest of the cabinet's back to get this proposal drafted. They didn't even know it was being prepared. Wow. And she then trotted off to Germany to talk to a foreign leader, Angela Merkel, and to run it past her. I think that's the best interpretation you can put on it, or possibly get her approval.
Yes.
And that was before her own cabinet even knew this policy existed. She then called the summit at Chequers, where she effectively tried to bounce them into supporting it with all sorts of threats. I'm just absolutely outraged by it.
Donna, you are Sherborne, you're absolutely out there in rural England. Donna, you feel enraged about it. You think she is guilty of treachery. Tell me something. How do your friends and family down in Dorset feel about what she's done?
Well, the people that I know who are also on the Brexit side of the argument with me, I haven't met anybody who isn't incandescent with rage over this. It's beyond angry.
Do you know, Donna, I honestly don't think they get this. I don't think they get this in London. I was chatting with Ed Miliband earlier, and I was saying you may be seeing people in the shires, Tory voters who are angry. I said, don't underestimate how Labour voters are going to feel, too, in the Midlands and the North. Donna, does London feel like a different country sometimes, living in Dorset?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've only lived in Dorset for 18 months. I was in Surrey before that, and obviously I worked in London for a long while. London has changed an awful lot in the last 20, 30 years. We all know that. Yeah. But yes, the whole of the establishment, and I use that word to cover an awful lot of areas, big business, government, the civil service, broadcast media, they have absolutely no idea how life goes on in the regions, and they don't want to know.
No, Donna,
they really don't want to know.
Donna, your passion is extraordinary. You've argued your case very, very well, and I have to say, the point you make, that she effectively went to the German Chancellor to get permission before presenting this to the Cabinet, it says an awful lot. Thank you very much for your call. And yeah, the White Paper is out tomorrow, but it's not the White Paper David Davis wanted to put out. It's the White Paper that Ollie Robbins, the Civil Service, wanted to put out, and Mrs May chose to side with Ollie Robbins and not David Davis, and that is why David Davis absolutely had to resign, because she'd frankly made a fool of him because he believed in Brexit. May is not a traitor. Blair was a traitor. May is under the illusion that she's Thatcher Mark II. She has to go, says Ed. Jim says, in big capital letters, I am furious with May. She has destroyed the Tory party. I will never vote Tory again. And you know something, Jim? I think they're in for a very big shock. When we see the opinion polls published in the Sunday newspapers, I think for the Tory party, it's going to be through the floor. England still leading 1-0, half-time approaching. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:45. Well, Theresa May, I have to say, Donna from down in Sherborne in Dorset before the break argued that she is guilty of treachery, and she laid out her case and did it with great passion. Not everybody agrees. Laurie says May is not a traitor, just way out of her depth. Kevin Keegan took the England job but chucked it, stating he come up short on the job. Maybe he could give us some advice. Come on, England, says Laurie. I agree with Donna. The PM has been duplicitous in the extreme, even keeping David Davis in the dark for 2 years, says Stuart from Cornwall. And Andrew on Twitter has a right go at the Telegraph. He says it's not all of them, it's just the Telegraph that are reporting this feeling. And he warns this far-right rhetoric leads to the rise of far-right extremists. Andrew, what leads to the rise of what you may call far-right extremists are governments ignoring people. Don't underestimate the anger out there. And when you hear one of my previous callers tonight, a staunch Remainer, now calling Theresa May a hero, you realise why this simply cannot continue. On Twitter, what Mrs May is doing is the dictionary definition of treason, working with foreign powers against the interests of our country. The fact she is Prime Minister makes it infinitely more treasonous. There's some very strong feelings out there. Let's go to Croydon. Let's speak to Leon. Good evening, Leon.
Thank you very much for having me, Nigel.
Not one bit.
Well,
so, is she a traitor, Leon?
No, she's not.
Okay.
In my view, to sum her up, one word: complete genius.
Genius?
Of course she is. The person who is a traitor is Boris Johnson. David Cameron called a referendum. He didn't have the guts to see it through. Boris Johnson deceived the nation in believing that Brexit was the best thing to do.
Well, it is the best thing to do, Leon. By far the best thing to do. To be independent, to be free, to govern yourselves. What's wrong with that?
No, there's nothing absolutely wrong with it. But why did he not see it through? He is the traitor for deceiving the country and leaving and abandoning the country.
But hang on, Leon. He was the Foreign Secretary until a couple of days ago. He was seeing it through, but he decided that what he'd agreed to on Friday night, and he shouldn't have done, he should have walked out then. I mean, that's the truth of it, Leon, and you can criticise Boris by saying that before he resigned, he licked his finger and tried to see which way the wind was blowing. You could say that of him, but Leon, he hasn't walked away. He's just said, I can't be part of a government that is betraying Brexit voters.
I think he's the one who's deceived the voters, not Theresa May. Well, Theresa May is a remainder.
Yeah.
And he's the one who's deceived the people and realised that what he had promised the people cannot be delivered.
All right.
It's impossible to be delivered.
No, it's not impossible to be delivered. You can do what you like in life. And you know, nearly every country in the world, Leon, is independent. They govern themselves, often very well, sometimes incredibly badly. But that is what Brexit was about. It was about, do we want to govern our own country, control our own borders, have our own fishing waters, make our own laws? And some people tell me we'll be poorer. But the point is we'll be free. Leon, thank you. I know Boris is not universally popular with some. Now, Marty has a theory. I strongly suspect that Theresa May is going to come out of this looking like the new Iron Lady. Okay. She seems to be playing with the EU and her opponents. It will be a no-deal Brexit. Marty on Facebook, it's a fascinating idea, but it's wrong. I just don't believe a word of it, I'm afraid. Edwina on Facebook says Brussels will push her into a corner. We have not even started negotiations, but she's given away so much already. She has no place to go now. WTO, the only way. Well, do you know what, Edwina? If Monsieur Barnier and Verhofstadt and all these charming people in Brussels do not want to have a grown-up negotiation, then let's go for the WTO. Let's just get on with it. Let's start reaching out to a bigger, broader, wider world. Folks, those of you that are worried about what the CBI says to you, remember this. Only 15% of the global economy is part of the Eurozone. There's a big, big world out there. George is calling from Northolt, a new caller to my show. George, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, Mrs May, tough things being said. What would you call her?
I'd call her a floating log. She just goes with the stream wherever it leads.
Right, okay. So
The real traitors are the MPs who represent constituencies who voted to leave.
Yes, and there are lots of them.
Representing their people. And their people should demand that they represent them, or the MP should just simply step down if he has a conscience and say, I can't agree with you. Simple as that.
Yeah, there's about 250 constituencies, George, that voted to leave, that have members of Parliament that really don't want us to leave. So they're the ones that you're targeting.
Yes. And, of course, the opposite way around. If the MPs who are voting to leave and the constituencies vote to remain, they should resign as well. That is true democracy. What's at risk here is democracy in general.
What?
If you're a Remainer, if you're a Leaver, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is, even if you're a Remainer and you overturn the decision, you overturned democracy. That's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, the anger out there, George, and I've been sort of toying with this, on this show for 2 or 3 months. Are people getting angry, or are they so disaffected that they may just give up with the whole democratic process, believing it to be a complete waste of time?
Well, if they had the conviction to vote the way they did, they should have the conviction to vote again the way they did before. I think, Nigel, one of your callers earlier on said, blamed you for a lot of things.
Of course.
I blame you for where we are today because you left.
Well,
if you stayed,
George, I had no role. I had no role. I offered my services; they weren't wanted, so I continued as leader of a group in the European Parliament. I mean, I haven't exactly retired to the coast and sit there smoking a pipe all day. I'm still pretty busy. I'm still pretty active. If they'd wanted me to play any part in this process, I'd have been happy to help. They didn't.
Well, you can. Yeah, you can. There was a debate the other day where it should be a people's vote, and some. I'm not going I'll go bleep because of what I'd like to say to him. He said we should have a people's vote, accept the deal, or stay in. It was actually on the Sheila Ferguson show. And I was about to ring, and she said, why don't we have a people's vote? Well, with 3 options, not 2. Leave, Brexit, as it is, out, cliff fall, whatever the case may be. Or accept the Chequers deal, or remain. I think that's a good idea. Let the people decide.
Well, with people
on one proviso. On one proviso. If we lose, Leavers lose, it's 1-1.
1-1, and we go. So, would we then go to extra time or penalties immediately? Which of those would we do? Do you think?
And whatever that referendum, the third referendum.
No, George, please. I'm going to quote Brenda from Bristol. Oh, not another one. I don't think there's any appetite genuinely for a second referendum. I think people would feel really angry. George, I thank you. I've got time for one last quick caller. Jeremy, a new caller from Bournemouth in Dorset. Good evening, Jeremy.
Nigel, nice to talk to you, Nigel.
Pleasure to have you on. So, is this language a bit strong, or is it appropriate?
I think it's puerile and inappropriate, Nigel. But I don't want to get hung up over this, this particular issue. It's a distraction. It's a distraction from the main issue, which is how do we negotiate our exit from the EU? And forgive me for saying this, but I think the only way we can do that is by campaigning for English sovereign independence from the United Kingdom. Because if we succeeded in doing that, if we had a referendum on English independence, and if it succeeded, we'd be out of the EU just like that.
Well,
because it's Britain that's part of the EU.
Well, hang on a second, Jeremy. Wales voted by a bigger margin to leave than the overall UK result, so the Welsh are very much leavers, and I'm not so sure about Scotland either now. I think a lot of the things the Scots were told, they're now beginning to reconsider. But certainly, if England was a separate nation from the rest of the EU, Brexit would be simpler. But Jeremy, if the word treason is too great, what word would you describe the Chequers Accord, given the promises that Theresa May had made to the people?
Let's get real here. The politicians have always misled the electorate, have even betrayed them. It's just par for the course. It goes with the territory.
Well, but this time, Jeremy, people aren't putting up with it, are they?
Said about what Theresa has done. I don't see anything particularly unusual about it. And anybody looking at her track record over the last couple of years, anybody with any common sense would have been able to predict what she's doing.
Yeah, because she did it at the Home Office. Jeremy, I thank you for your call. On Twitter, in regards to Mrs May's Brexit plan, and as an ordinary person, I feel so angry right now. Cheated, deceived, betrayed, double-crossed, misled, lied to, irate, fuming, incensed and infuriated. Joe, calm down, have a glass of something, but I tell you what, Westminster, you've no idea how angry the country is. I'll be back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive.